Welcome everyone. Hi, my name is Reem Bazari, Product Marketing Manager here at ChargePoint. And with me today is our expert on all things workplace charging, Tracy Thomas. He heads our entire workplace charging team. And today we're going to go over the top 3 considerations or best practices that you should be thinking about if you're a workplace looking to add EV charging for the first time, or maybe even a workplace that has EV charging and are looking to expand or get the most out of your deployment. So before I get started, I just want to take a quick moment to talk about where we are at this point in time. By 2030, according to BCG, more than a third of all vehicles sold are going to be fully or partially electric. So you're probably driving around seeing more and more EVs on the road. Just wait, in the next 10 years or less, there's going to be a huge addition to EVs on the road. So the time to act is now. What's happening or what's driving that possibly? Governments are really pushing for incentives and policies to curb emissions. That includes getting more EVs and EV charging happening. And of course, automakers are investing in new EV models, whether they've been in the EV car business or they're just starting to come up with new models. There's a lot of money going into that. So Tracy, you're probably seeing that as well as you work with a lot of our workplace customers.
Yeah, thanks, Reem. Yeah, so I have the opportunity to work with a lot of our largest customers. And what's interesting is because vehicles are becoming electrified more, businesses are really feeling the impact, and they're feeling the impact because there's more employees showing up with electric vehicles. If they have retail locations, there's more customers showing up with electric vehicles. And many of these companies might have fleet operations or shuttles, and these fleets and shuttles are getting electrified. And so it's really hard to ignore it now as a business. But one thing that all businesses have in common is their employees are showing up, wanting to charge at work. In fact, it may be a surprise to a lot of people that many employees want and need to charge at work. In fact, sometimes it's their primary source of charging because they don't have charging at home. And so workplace charging is really becoming a much bigger deal for companies, and it's a big opportunity, actually.
Yeah. Makes sense because you spend so much time at work.
Yes.
Okay.
And so now, actually, workplace charging has been around for about 10 years, I would say, but it's actually pretty big business now. Over 4,000 businesses actually are providing some type of charging at work for their employees. Mm-hmm. There's over 100,000 active employees that are driving to work and charging on a monthly basis, and that's growing at a very healthy rate. It's over 50% growth year over year. So if you've got 10 employees charging this year, you're going to have 15 next year, and that we've seen that pretty consistently. Many large companies are now starting to invest in this for their employees. Almost half of the Fortune 500 are doing something with workplace charging. So if you're not doing this yet, you've got a lot of company jump in because it's actually becoming more mainstream.
Yeah, and you're seeing that across the board, right? Fortune 500, smaller companies. Everything.
Yeah, it's not just big companies. So about a third of the workplace charging that's done out there is with big Fortune 500 type companies, but 2/3 is smaller companies. So it's really for everyone.
Right.
I think what's interesting though on this slide is, as big as it is, there's still a lot of employees that are driving EVs and they don't have access to workplace charging. And so today there's about 1 million of these employees that are driving to work. 100,000 of them have access to charging at work, and 900,000 don't. And so and this is what we think about every day. So how do we help businesses provide more access to their employees that are driving to work, driving EVs? And I think the other thing is this is growing 50% a year. So if you do nothing, next year there's going to be another 500,000 drivers on the road.
Right.
So it's a big opportunity.
We just talked about how much how many more cars are going to be on the road in the
Yes.
next decade. So that totally is going to be even bigger. So with that, you're probably seeing some common themes as you work with the thousands of workplace customers. Maybe you can simplify it for us and tell us the top 3 buckets of things to think about.
The really the common areas of inquiry are really, should we charge for charging? How do we increase our utilization of the infrastructure?
Mm-hmm.
And then as companies start to expand and scale, it's we get a lot of questions about how do we manage costs. And so I think those are the 3 that we wanted to talk about today. And we can start with charging for charging.
So I'm a business, I acquired EV charging. Should I charge my employees? Should I give it for free? What's everybody doing?
Yeah, this is a big question that we get. And the reality today, and this might surprise some people, is that the majority of workplace charging is free to the user, for the driver. And so our workplace average, we've surveyed thousands of customers, and basically it's 58%, let's just call it 60%, is totally free, and 40% there's some type of charging policy. There are certain sectors, like our largest sector, tech companies, where it's almost all free, 85, 86%, totally free. And another point that I want to make is, even when there is a pricing policy, a lot of times it's still free. It's free for 3 or 4 hours, and then there's a charge. So that really is the dominant model. Mm-hmm. And there's some good reasons for that. It provides a really clear benefit for the employee. It drives really high utilization, but it does come with some challenges. I mean, you've got to manage it more, because you're going to get hoarding behavior, and you kind of, people do strange things when it's totally free. And so I think having some etiquette and policies, which are real common, free comes with a little bit of a cost. Let's put it that way.
Right. Because if I'm sitting and my ChargePoint app tells me, hey, your car's full, if there's no consequences, I may not want to get up and move it, or give somebody else a chance.
But it's interesting. The reality is there's no right answer here.
Right.
We're just showing you kind of what's the common practice. I'm not necessarily saying free is the best practice.
Right.
It's a common practice.
And even for charging, there's different ways to do that. Correct. So let's look at that.
Yeah, and so there's basically we see 3 different models for when people do charge for charging. Mm-hmm. There's 3 different models that we see. The first one that's probably the most common is idle time. Mm-hmm. And so basically this is, it's free for a certain period of time. And then after that, there is a charge. And the charge is really meant not to collect money, although it does that. It's more to drive a behavior of, when I'm done charging, which is typically about 3 hours, I move my vehicle. Right. And so 4-hour window is kind of a 1 hour grace period is pretty common.
And then you're basing that 3 to 4 hours based on the data that you're seeing from our...
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Which we'll show that in a little bit.
Okay.
The other method is pretty straightforward. It's energy use, and it's it's either charging by the kilowatt hour where that's available, or it's charging per hour where that's not, due to regulations. But it's essentially what companies are trying to do here is they are either trying to recoup some of their cost. Mm-hmm. Energy use is about 25 to 33% of the total cost of ownership. And so you can recoup some of those costs. Or a lot of times the money is insignificant for the company. It's more about just wanting to people to make good trade-off decisions. The trick here is making sure that whatever you do charge, you're charging a rate that's equal to or less than what the employee could get at home, so that you don't have this perception of trying to take advantage of your employees. That's really bad.
Yeah, so even if you are charging money, you want people to feel like it's a nice perk. Yes. It's a benefit still. Makes sense.
And then the last one is a graduated pricing scheme. It's kind of a variation of the 2 that preceded this. And this is really meant to discourage the Monday morning scenario where you've got the empty Tesla, mm-hmm. and they're charging for 8 hours when maybe you would only want them to charge for 4 or 5. And so you're really kind of putting a mechanism in place where they can make those trade-off decisions better.
Yeah, and you can definitely get a lot of energy within those 3 to 4 hours. So
Yes.
it's definitely.
I think the point I want to make on charging for charging, though, because sometimes I get customers that are trying to cover all of their costs.
Right.
And we don't see that. And it's actually, the costs are too high. It doesn't get used by employees. And then it really creates a bad brand on your program. You don't want, you want this to be perceived as a benefit. You've got to go into this thinking about, I'm going to subsidize this as a benefit for my employees. And we'll get into kind of why you want to do that. But you don't want to recover all of your cost.
Yeah, it sounds like you don't want to lose sight of what your goal is or why you even did this in the first place. Makes sense. So we talked about a little bit about charging for charging, how different companies may go about it, why to do it, different ways to do it. Let's talk about increasing utilization. So you've implemented this awesome solution. You want to get the most out of it. You want most people using it.
Yeah, and so utilization is probably the second biggest category, where once people start deploying workplace charging and they start to look at the session times, they actually realize that, in most cases there's a percentage of the time where the car is plugged in where it's actually not drawing energy, and that's what we call idle time. And trying to reduce that actually is a good way of increasing your utilization, allowing you to serve more drivers, more employees. And so this chart, let me explain it first. We're looking at 4 different benchmarks. The first one at the top is the workplace average. This is the overall average, thousands of customers. And then we have some very specific sectors where we're taking some of our largest tech companies, about 20 tech companies, 20 financial service companies, 20 healthcare companies, just to get a very specific vertical index. But they're all pretty similar. I think what's interesting about this is if you look at total session time, it's anywhere from 4.1 to 4.8 hours. So it's like 4 to 5 hours is kind of the average session time. So that's the time that the vehicle is plugged into the charger.
Yeah.
But if you go look at charge time, which is that second column, it's typically 2 to 3 hours is what they're actually drawing energy. And then in that first column, idle time, it's 1.5 to 2 hours, where the car is just sitting there, it's plugged in, it's taking up the spot, but it's not dispensing energy. And so what's typical, because workplace charging is still about parking, you have 35 to 40% of the time that the car is plugged in, it's actually not drawing energy. And that's just the nature of workplace charging today. But many companies are wanting to reduce that idle time as a way to serve more drivers. And we've got some ways to help them do that.
Awesome.
And the method, it really depends on your parking situation. And so there's kind of 2 buckets here. One is when parking is unconstrained. We have that here at ChargePoint, where it's relatively easy to move your vehicle. And so there's really no penalty of having to kind of go move your vehicle. And so we have some features like waitlist, which is a great app that communicates when charging is done and when the next station is available, that really helps people move in and out
so I've used that one. So basically, if I come in and it seems like all the stations are taken, I tap my phone, I tap the app, and it tells me, hey, you're next in line when it's my time to come and charge. Somebody else moves.
Exactly.
So I don't have to look out the window or send emails.
Waitlist is a great feature, and it really works when you can go move your vehicle. Same with idle time pricing that we just talked about. But there's these environments that many customers have where it's constrained parking. There's a real penalty of having to kind of go move your vehicle because there's no parking. And so in those environments, waitlist and idle time pricing doesn't work.
I can't just go and walk half an hour and go.
And so where we see success is using things like valet services. And we actually have a feature that is a valet feature that enables this. But this works really well in constrained parking environments where there are valet parking. It doesn't take up a lot of parking space. They can serve lots of customers, lots of drivers. And so we see this work really, really well. And we've got the tools to enable that. there's another one that we see a little bit. It's cord sharing. It's pretty low tech. It's basically the way you set up your station so that one port can serve two parking spaces, and this can have reduce the amount of disruption to employees having to leave and move their vehicle. And so we see this in some cases too.
So a lot of considerations, whether it's technology, whether it's pricing, whether it's your physical constraints or physical parking lot to take into consideration. So the next thing that you mentioned that we are going to talk about is reducing total cost of ownership. So this is something I imagine you would think about whether you're putting in EV charging for the first time ever, or maybe you're thinking about expanding. Is there still a chance to reduce your total cost of ownership?
I'm seeing this more and more as companies are starting to expand.
Wow.
And I think they're now, the company's trying to understand, where is this going? Like, where are these, we need to understand the cost and how does this thing scale? And I think the most important thing I would tell customers to do is, when looking at cost, to look at the total cost of ownership over
time,
5-year period, 7-year period, 10-year period. That's the best way of understanding what the true costs are. Because if you just do purchase price, there's a lot of other hidden costs that you're not going to see. And so, kind of first thing is look at total cost of ownership. That's how we view it. And there's the first kind of major cost that people experience is preparing the site for charging. Most sites are not ready to accept, charging stations.
Right.
And so often there is work to be done on the electric panel, running conduit, actually setting up the stations. And so, this is, an important element. But the good news is there's ways to reduce this. And we work with customers to develop strategies to lower this cost. And it really can, I feel like everything comes in 2 buckets. So the first bucket that I want to talk about is new construction. And so preparing the site is the least expensive when you're dealing with new construction or major tenant improvement. And literally the make-ready cost can be a fraction of what it is in post-construction, a fifth of the cost. So, it's really just materials and a little bit of labor.
Yeah.
Versus post-construction, you're now having to go back into the site and you're upgrading and you're digging and you're running wire and there's more labor involved. And so it can be 5 times the expense. It's not a reason not to do it. It's just the strategy here is, when you have a new construction or a major tenant improvement opportunity, you want to make sure that you're building for the future and installing your make ready. In fact, if you go to the slide here, advice that we give our clients is work with the real estate team to make sure that they're establishing standards when it is new construction, to set aside 10% of the parking spaces for make ready and for electrifying them. You may not need all 10% right away, but at least get the plumbing and the infrastructure set up to do it, because it's so inexpensive in the new construction environment.
And that's what you've seen from your experience with the customers.
Yes.
This is
I mean, I would say that the 10% rule is a best practice that we see quite common, and it works for outside of California, and we're actually starting to see that even get higher in California.
Yeah.
But the main thing is get a policy. Now, most situations, most opportunities are actually in the post-construction environment. And so here, there's a couple things to consider. I think one is look to see if there's incentive programs. A lot of these incentive programs by utilities and governments, state governments, are designed to reduce the upfront cost. And so there may be some incentives to take advantage of that would lower your make-ready expense and therefore lower your TCO.
Awesome.
And even if there isn't, if you're going to go in and basically plumb for 10 stations or 10 ports, you might as well plumb for 30, because that it's going to be doubling and tripling over time. And so, install bigger panels, run bigger pipes for conduit. These are things that you can do now that will save you money later.
Yeah. So it sounds like planning for the expansion, planning for the future really pays off.
Yes. And so there are other levers that we have to lower your total cost of ownership. Some that I'll talk about here that we haven't gone into yet is the first one I want to talk about is minimizing station downtime. You've got to go in with a mindset of really recognizing that EV charging is important for your employees. You really can't afford to have downtime.
I would say it's essential. Like I can't get home.
they rely on it.
Yeah.
And so I think don't overlook that. And then because of that, you want to make sure the system is up as much as possible. And so you really need to have a maintenance program, a maintenance approach. You can do it yourself. You can self-maintain, or you can use ChargePoint or other third parties to do it. But regardless, you need to have a maintenance program, because unplanned downtime is really expensive. It's really expensive from the customer experience, but it's expensive in getting it fixed. You know, parts and labor and all that stuff costs more when it's unplanned. So that's one that we focus on. I think another one that I would point out here is leveraging power management software.
Right.
So we have power management in the stations. We have power management software that can help balance charging load between buildings and charging infrastructure that can reduce demand charges. You know, so there's tools that we have that can really help you manage your energy costs and prevent either demand charges or maybe unnecessary infrastructure upgrades by just managing the power more efficiently.
So that will probably save you money because you can end up serving more cars with fewer stations.
Yes.
Yeah. And we do have some more resources on power management that I can show everyone after we're done with the webinar.
This is an interesting slide, because I think a lot of times I get questions like, well, what does it actually cost? You know, and so I think looking at the table on the left, we've got a couple of examples here. On the high side, if you think about, you know, just a few stations, fully subsidized, you know, the total cost of ownership is about $780 for a driver, and that includes everything: the make-ready, the infrastructure, the EV infrastructure, the utility expense, all in.
So not just the station itself; you're thinking of the
everything.
Whole solution.
Again, because we're about total cost.
Yeah.
So all that total cost, you know, built into the driver, it's about $780 a year. On the low side, you know, when you start to at scale, you've got maybe 100 stations. Maybe you're charging for some of the utility expense. On the low end, it's, you know, $450. And so if you take those dollar amounts and you look at it per day, per work day, it's actually about $2 to $3 per work day per driver. And so, I mean, it's literally less than a Starbucks cup of coffee.
You know what, Tracy, if you ask me how much I think it is, the perceived value is so high, you know? And we're going to talk about that later, but
I think so for a business, you know, it's like, let's just say it's $500 to $600 of investment per employee, but yet it's getting all of these great returns in terms of, you know, your impact on the environment, your ability to attract and retain and engage your employees. And, you know, when it starts to get at scale, you know, really enhancing your corporate brand and being that extension of corporate brand. And so it's inexpensive, you know, kind of, we like the coffee analogy, but the return on investment, the things that it does for your company are so much more.
Right, because if you're taking thinking about charging, well, am I going to stop charging my car on my way home, et cetera, all of that away from the employee, then they're engaged, they're focusing, they're not worrying about all of this stuff.
Yeah, and so I think what's really interesting here and why I think workplace charging is such a great investment is if you really look at this from the employee perspective. On the one hand, you're spending about, as an employer, about $500 to $600 per employee, but what's the employee getting? Well, number one, you're empowering them to drive sustainably, which is really, really powerful. And in fact, you know, for an employee that's using an electric vehicle for their commute, I mean, it's literally about a metric ton of CO2 emissions reduction per driver. And that includes the home charging and the work charging. So, you know, big impact that you're enabling that employee to do to contribute to their community, you know, reduce the impact of climate change. But then there's other benefits. So now they actually have enhanced productivity in terms of using HOV lane access, if that's, you know, appropriate in their in their community, and then the fueling convenience of not having to go to gas stations, but fueling at home, at work. But more importantly, lowering their transportation costs. So literally by using an electric vehicle, there's much lower fuel expense, and there's much lower maintenance expense. And so there's a lot of documentation on this, but easily, several $1,000s of lower transportation costs. And so the box on the right is really kind of bringing it home, where if you're an employee and you're spending $500 to $600 on your employee is actually getting 3 to 5 times that in benefit. And that's what makes this so powerful, and why employees love it, and why it's such a good investment for employers and their employees.
Absolutely. And we're seeing that even for employees who may not already drive an electric vehicle, once the employer puts in electric charging, a lot of employees go and get their cars because they love all these benefits before they get them. Yeah. So, and those are probably the 3 big buckets where what our customers are loving about.
Yeah, it's interesting how the kind of the voiceover on this is often these programs start as a sustainability initiative.
Yeah.
But as more employees start to use the service and show up with electric vehicles, it then becomes a talent thing, attracting and retaining talent and driving higher employee engagement. And then eventually for some that want to have that want their brand to represent their sustainability, now this is a very visible representation of their brand and brand image.
It's right in front of the company, or as your visitors come. Awesome. Well, Tracy, we really appreciate all the information you've gathered for us, going through the data that we have and compiling it and making it digestible and coming up with conclusions.
Well, it's interesting. I'm really excited about this space. And, we are seeing more and more companies start to invest in workplace charging. Probably not a surprise because of these great employee benefits. We continue to track this every year. More than 25% of Fortune Best 100 companies to work for, to no surprise, are a ChargePoint customer and are investing in workplace charging. And so there's a long list of these companies that continue to show up on the top 100 places to work, and they are big ChargePoint customers. They clearly care about their employees, and they're using workplace charging as another way of attracting and retaining and investing in their employees.
That's great. That's a great sample size to draw on and get best practices from and kind of understand. Well, thank you all for joining us for this on-demand webinar. Feel free to contact us directly if you have any questions. You can visit our website or email us if this piqued your interest and you want to get more resources. Click on Solutions Resources right here. And you can look by type of information or specific to workplace. A lot of great helpful stuff. And again, as I mentioned, feel free to call us directly or email us sales@chargepoint.com.